When you're working with automation and pipelines, it probably makes sense to break your pipelines up into the process that works for you. That's what we're going to investigate in today's video using Azure DevOps pipelines and Terraform. Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Ned Bellavance, Ned1313 on Twitter, and welcome to Terraform Tuesday. I hope you got your tacos ready. This is going to be a good time. This is another video in the series all about using Azure DevOps pipelines and Terraform. So if you haven't watched the previous videos, I'll do like a little recap, but you should probably watch those as well so you can get up to speed on what we're doing in this one. Before I get into the meat of this video, two quick things for you. Number one, I just want to plug my podcast, Day 2 Cloud. If you go to day2cloud.io, you can find the website, or you can just search for it in your favorite podcatcher. I have awesome conversations between me, my co-host Ethan, and whatever guests we can find. And let me tell you, there's some awesome people coming up you definitely don't want to miss. So I just wanted to plug that a little bit. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I have a new personal website. It's been updated. It looks better. I think it's better laid out. You can actually find things. So if you check out nedinthecloud.com, I'd love to hear your feedback. So let me know what you think. All right, with that out of the way, let's get into today's topic, which is splitting up your pipeline in Azure DevOps pipelines. In my last video about Azure DevOps pipelines and Terraform, I mentioned that I had two goals I wanted to accomplish. One was to split up the monolithic pipeline into separate pipelines, depending on what I'm doing with the source code. And the other was to stash a plan file and then use that stashed plan file in the apply phase instead of running apply with the auto approve flag. I don't love that. I don't like that idea. I want to be able to review what's in the plan and then approve that exact plan to be what is actually applied in my environment. So those are the two main goals that I had around this new video. Okay, so let's go over the pipeline that we've built so far. So I'm going to make a little graphic and I'm going to throw it up on the screen now. And basically what our pipeline does today is when a new version of the code is committed to the main branch. So right now we've just been working with the main branch. When a new version of the code is committed to the main branch, it kicks off the pipeline. And then we go through a series of validation steps. We make sure that the code is valid using Terraform Validate. We also run some checkoff tests to make sure that we're not outside of compliance with the various checkoff things. And then we run a Terraform plan against that and also take the plan output and run that through checkoff as well. If you're confused about what this checkoff thing is, I did a whole video about it, so I'll throw a link up in the card now. But basically, checkoff lets you check both the configuration and the plan file to make sure it doesn't violate any security or compliance kind of things. You can set up your own policies and rules, but definitely check out the video if you want to know more about that. Anyway, so it goes through that whole process, and at the end, we have a plan, and it goes into a manual approve stage and waits for that to be approved. And once that is approved, then it runs through Terraform apply using the -auto approve flag. Now, like I said, I didn't entirely love this. First of all, in a real development setting, you're not going to be committing directly to the main branch. What you're going to do is you're going to create a branch, whether it's a feature or something you want to add. You're going to add that code into that separate branch. And then you're going to check that code in to the repository and then eventually run a pull request against the main branch, and then that will be merged. So that would be the general process for updating the code. And I want my pipelines to follow that process. So what does that mean? It means I want 3 pipelines. What do I want these pipelines to do? Well, the first pipeline, I would like to do a continuous integration test with my Terraform code that is being pushed from my local desktop up to the source control that's up in GitHub. So what do I want to do in that phase? I want to run 2 things. I want to check the formatting on my file because I want people to be following proper Terraform formatting in their files. And number 2, I want to validate that just at a base layer, the syntax is correct. So you can do that by running Terraform FMT for format, and then also running Terraform Validate to check the code. And I can run that every time I push a new commit up to the remote branch. Okay, so that is what I want to do initially when a new branch is created and code is pushed to it. Then the next thing I want to do is when a pull request is issued, I want to run some pipeline automation to revalidate that the code is good. And then I also want to run it through my whole checkoff process because that takes a little bit longer. So I only really want to do that when a pull request is ongoing. And then finally, I want to produce a plan file for my pull request, which can be part of the review process before that pull request is approved and merged into main. Once it's merged into main, what do I want to do there? I want to kick off a new pipeline that takes the plan file from the pull request and uses that plan file to apply to the target environment. So like I said, we've got 3 pipelines here, one for CI, one for pull requests, and one for a successful merge. That was my plan. Now, I had to change some things about the Terraform configuration to add these additional pipelines and also add some new variables to connect the tissue between the pipelines. So let's go over to Terraform now and take a look at what I had to change there to get things where they needed to be to create all these pipelines and also connect them together. Okay, here we are in Visual Studio Code. And if you're looking for the files, if you've been trying to follow along, they are located on my GitHub. Terraform Tuesday is the name of the repository. The link should pop up now. So you can go there and you can get these files. You can fork the repository, do whatever you want. So the first thing we're going to look at is the files in the setup directory. And if you remember from the very first video, when I set all of this up, I used Terraform and Terraform Cloud to provision all of the resources in Azure and Azure DevOps that I would use for my pipeline process. So that is what this configuration is all about. So definitely watch that if you haven't gone through it and you're feeling a little confused. But let's just talk about the things that I needed to change. Well, first of all, I needed to create 3 pipelines and not just one. So how did I go about that? Let's open up the Azure DevOps file and we'll scroll down to where I create my pipelines. So here's the Azure DevOps build definition, pipelines. So this was just one pipeline before. Now I'm creating 3. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use the for each meta argument, and I'm going to point it at a map that has the values I want to use for my pipelines. And then you can see, looking through the contents here, for the name, I'm using the key in the map space pipeline. So each pipeline will use that key space pipeline for the naming. And then a little further down, if you look at the YAML path for the pipeline, where can it find the pipeline configuration? I'm doing each.value. So I have a key and a value. Now, where is that information configured? That's over in variables. So let's go ahead and open up variables and we'll scroll up to where I'm defining the ADO pipeline YAML paths. So you can see this is a type of map string. So it's going to be a map of strings. And then for the default value, I've got 3 different keys, CI, PR, and merge. Those are our pipelines. And then the path to each of those. So that's how it's going to create these new pipelines once I applied this configuration to Terraform. That built my 3 pipelines. Awesome. Now, I did mention that I'm going to be stashing a file from one pipeline and then using it in the next pipeline. So that's another thing that I had to set up. I had to add some additional Terraform variables in here. So let's take a look at that. So if we go back to Azure DevOps in here, if we scroll up a little bit, within the project itself, I've defined a variable group. And I had to add a few new variables to this variable group to get that communication between pipelines. I needed to add in a project ID, because that's a value you need when you want to reference another pipeline. I needed the pipeline ID. And then finally, this was something else that I did. I actually added the Terraform version argument back in, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But I added that in. So now there's 3 new variables I'm defining and creating in my variable group in Azure DevOps pipelines. You can see for project ID, I'm grabbing that from the project ID of the project I created as part of this Terraform config. For the second one, I'm looking up the pipeline ID for the PR pipeline that I'm creating within this Terraform configuration. And then lastly, I'm defining a Terraform version to use within the pipeline through a variable. And if we go over to that variable definition, down to Terraform version, you can see I have it defined as 1.0.3 as the default. Now, obviously, I can override that by supplying a runtime variable value, but right now I'm sticking with 1.0.3 because that's the newest as of like today. So those are the changes I had to make in my Terraform configuration, and then I applied those changes, and now all of my pipelines have been updated, and so has my variable group. Now, next, let's talk about these 3 new pipelines that I created and what's in each of those. And we'll talk a little bit about the challenges I encountered trying to get these things to work. The pipelines for my configuration are inside the VNet folder. So let me go ahead and expand those now. And you can see there's 4 pipelines in here. One's the original pipeline that I'm getting rid of, and then the 3 new pipelines. Remember, there's a check-in one or a CI pipeline, a PR pipeline, and a merge pipeline. So let's take a look at what's in that CI pipeline first. Okay, so I am loading the variable group Terraform Tuesday, and I'm going to do that for each of the pipelines. So I'm just going to mention it now, but I'm going to skip it going forward. Then the next I have to set up what's the trigger, what actually makes this pipeline kick off. And in our case, the trigger is set to any branch that's not main. So if I create a new branch and make a commit to it and push that up to GitHub, now that is going to kick off this pipeline. And for paths, I'm including only the current directory that I'm working in because I don't want changes in other Terraform Tuesday projects to kick off this pipeline each time. So that's what's going on in the trigger. Now, what did we want to do here? We wanted to check the formatting of the code, and we wanted to check the validation of the code. So first thing we're going to do is have a stage called check-in, and the display name is check-in testing, and we're going to define a couple jobs in here. The first job is to check the formatting. I have to invoke a pool where I'm going to check this formatting from. So I'm using the VM image Ubuntu latest. And as I mentioned in a previous video, that has Terraform pre-installed. It has the latest version of Terraform pre-installed. And someone pointed out in the comments, hey, Ned, you probably shouldn't do that. You probably want to control which version of Terraform they're running. And I was like, bah, it'll be fine. And then later on, when I was working on these pipelines, it broke because the one instance of Ubuntu had spun up with 1.0.2, and a separate Ubuntu instance in a different pipeline had spun up with 1.0.3, because I guess it depends on which image version you get when a new version of Terraform drops. And it actually caused an error with the merge because it couldn't apply a plan file from an older version of Terraform. And I was like, that's why you specify the version. So I've added this back in, this install Terraform. And if we look at the inputs for this task where it installs Terraform, I'm giving it the Terraform version from the variable group that I defined way back when we were looking at the Terraform code. So this will install 1.0.3, and that will be consistent across all the pipelines until I decide to upgrade my version of Terraform. All right, once we have Terraform installed, we want to check our formatting, and I'm simply going to issue the command fmt as part of my inputs and point it at the working directory where I have my Terraform code. Now, usually if you're running fmt locally, it will change the contents of the files if you don't give it any other argument. When you use the Terraform CLI task, it implies that you want to run dash diff dash check, and I think one more recursive. So dash recursive. It automatically adds those switches in, so you don't have to. The check switch basically says, check to see if the formatting is okay, don't change the files, and return a non-zero error code or non-zero exit code if the formatting is not correct. So this will return a non-zero exit code if the formatting is not correct. Now for validate code, this is very straightforward. We're going to validate our code. So in order to do that, we actually have to initialize Terraform because it has to load all of the modules and providers that we're using in our configuration. And in order to do that and initialize this configuration, we're going to need to get some information from Azure Key Vault. If you watched the previous video where I added Azure Key Vault, that has all the information about the remote back end. So I'm not going to go through that now. You can go check it out in the previous video, but that's basically what it's doing. It's going to load the Key Vault secrets. It's going to initialize Terraform, and then it's going to run the validate step to validate the configuration. And I'm not using checkoff or anything in this. I just want to do a basic validation. It's very quick. And if the validation comes back clean and the formatting comes back clean, I know that I've written at least half decent Terraform code. So that is our check-in code. Now let's take a look at the PR code. Okay, here is our PR pipeline. And our goals with this is to run a more robust validation. So we want to add checkoff into the mix, and we want to produce a plan file, run that through checkoff, and then stash that plan file as an artifact from this pipeline. Now, I'm going to call your attention to the trigger block here, and we can see that it's trigger branches exclude main. So this is only going to run on branches that aren't main. If you know about Azure DevOps and the various options there, there's actually a PR keyword that you can use instead of trigger. Based off of my experience so far, the PR does nothing except screw things up. It's really weird. It did not work as expected. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but let's go through this configuration first. All right, let's scroll down here. So we're going to go through the validation process just like we did before. And we're going to install Terraform. We're going to install checkoff. This takes a little bit longer, which is why I am reserving this for only when we're doing a pull request. We'll get our Azure Key Vault secrets. We're going to initialize Terraform. We're then going to run another format check. I know we already ran this, but we're going to run it again just in case to make sure the formatting is good. We'll scroll down a little bit more. We're going to validate our configuration using the validate command. And then we're going to verify the module files that are part of my configuration using checkoff. We'll publish those test results so we can see how we did with checkoff. We'll scroll down a little bit more. Then we're going to verify our main files with checkoff because we did the modules. Now we're doing the main files and publish those test results. And scrolling down a little bit more, now we get into the next stage. We've passed all of our checkoff checks to make sure that our code is looking good. We're not violating any compliance policies or anything. Now we're going to get into the plan stage. We're going to produce our plan file. So for this, we are going to install Terraform again with the proper version. We'll install checkoff again. This is a new job, which means a new runner, which means we have to run some of these steps over again. We'll load our stuff from Key Vault and initialize Terraform. And then we're going to run a Terraform plan. And that Terraform plan is going to output the plan to a main.tf plan file. Cool. Then we can verify that plan with checkoff. That's a nice little feature. So we convert the plan to JSON and then we verify it with checkoff and add those test results to what we see in our pipeline testing results. And then finally, we are going to take that plan file and we're going to push it. And it says Azure Storage Account here because that was my original idea. But what I actually discovered is I can publish this as a pipeline artifact. So that's what I'm doing here. The target path is where's this file that you want to publish as an artifact? And then the artifact name tells it what you want to call this artifact. And then we're going to retrieve this artifact in our merge pipeline. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about trigger versus PR and some of the issues that I ran into. My original idea here was to run some basic CI stuff when you check in code and make it really quick. Check formatting and basic validation and be done. I don't want that to be a long and lengthy process. And then when you actually issue a pull request and you make changes within the context of your pull request, now we run a longer testing suite with checkoff and everything to make sure that looks good and actually produce a plan file. Now, based off of the documentation for Azure DevOps pipelines, there's a trigger keyword that allows you to define when a pipeline will trigger, like a CI pipeline. And then there's a PR keyword that's supposed to be for pull requests. So it only fires on pull requests. Now, what actually happened when I tried to use the PR keyword? Well, I put the PR keyword in my configuration and I excluded the main branch because I don't want it to run against that. And a weird thing happened. Not only did the PR keyword get triggered by any commit to the branch that I was working on, it actually also triggered when I made a commit to the main branch by doing a merge. So it was triggering on basically everything. Even though I had explicitly excluded main, it didn't matter. It was still running when I made a commit to any branch across the repository. And that's not what I wanted at all. So clearly something is amiss with the integration between Azure DevOps pipelines and GitHub. And hopefully that will be remedied at some point. But for now, I can't use it that way, which is why you're seeing the trigger keyword being used instead of PR, because it turns out PR doesn't really work. So I'm definitely going to follow up with Microsoft and see what's going on with that. But just in case you stumble across PR in the documentation, now you know why I didn't use it. Okay, now let's take a look at the merge pipeline and what's going on there. Okay, here's our merge pipeline. And the goal here is to take that TF plan file that we stashed as an artifact in the previous pipeline, retrieve that, and use it to apply the updated configuration once we've merged a pull request. So you can see the triggers here, we are including main only. So this branch, or this, I should say this pipeline, will only run on the main branch, none of the other branches. If you had different releases or something like that, or different tags, you could add that all in here as well. But for our purposes, it's just going to fire on main when there's a change to the main. Okay, now what else is in here? Well, we have a stage called apply, and just like you would think, that does what it says. It's going to apply our configuration. The first thing we have to do is install Terraform like we've been doing, and then we're going to download our plan file artifact. Now, how do we get this artifact from a different pipeline? We're going to have to change some inputs here. The source is specific, so I'm telling it we're going to get this from a specific pipeline. And because you can get it from a pipeline that is inside or outside of the project, you have to give it the project ID. And then you have to tell it which pipeline you want to grab it from. And then what's the name of the artifact that you want to grab. Now, those two settings in here, project ID and PR pipeline ID, are part of the variable group Terraform Tuesday that we updated with our Terraform configuration a while ago. So that's where it's getting all of those values. Once it has that pipeline artifact, now it's going to go through the initialization process. So it's going to get the key vault secrets to initialize the back end. Then we're going to initialize Terraform. And then finally, we're going to run Terraform apply. And you can see under command options, I'm passing it the main.tf plan file that I retrieved as a pipeline artifact. So that's it. That's the whole pipeline. It's pretty short because all the other work has been done before we get to the merge. So now the next thing I want to do is actually make a change in a new branch and push that, and we can follow along as the different pipelines kick off. Okay, the first thing we have to do is create a new branch. So I'm going to do this the easy way. I'm just going to do create new branch, and we can call this, we'll call it CI test 6, because that's the naming I've been using to test all this stuff. 6 is boring. Let's go with 13. 13's cooler, right? Okay, so now we have CI test 13. That's the branch that we're working on locally. And I'll go into the main.tf file, and I'm just going to make a simple change here. Let's change the names of our subnets from TacoNet 1 to TacoNet 11 and TacoNet 12. Okay, now we've made a change to our configuration, and we can commit that change locally. So we can say subnet naming change. There we go. And we'll commit that locally. Now, we've committed it locally. We need to push this up to the remote repository. And so we're going to do that by pushing the change. And it's going to notice, hey, this branch doesn't exist. Do I want to create this branch? I do. So I go ahead and click OK. Now that branch has been created on the GitHub repository. So why don't we go over to a browser and let's see what's going on with our pipelines. Okay, here we are in the pipelines view of the Azure DevOps project, and I'm going to go ahead and refresh the view. And now we can see it is kicked off two of the 3 pipelines. It's kicked off the CI pipeline, and the PR pipeline is waiting because I only have one runner available at a time. I'm on the free tier, Well, so let's go ahead and click in on that CI pipeline and see what's going on there. It's running a change based off of the commit called subnet naming change. That's the commit we made. And we can see the tag here is individual CI. And the branch that is based off of is CI test 13. Okay, that all checks out for me. Let's go ahead and click on it and see where it's going in the stage. So it successfully went through the formatting stage to check my formatting. Looks like my formatting was good. Hooray. And now it's going through the basic validation process. We can click and see more information here about how the job is running. We're currently in validate, so we can expand that out and see, all right, it's made it all the way through the validate. That's about to finish. It's in the post job check. Okay, awesome. Now let's go back to pipelines. And the next one up is the PR pipeline. We can click on that and wait for that to kick off. Looks like it has just started to kick off. That is perfect. And we can see under the description, individual CI for branch CI test 13. So it's the same properties that kicked off and triggered this pipeline. Now, like I said before, I tried to do this with the PR keyword instead of the trigger keyword. And even though it was an individual CI tag for a branch, it would still kick off the PR trigger, which makes no sense at all. So I just relented and said, okay, for now, I'll just have these two pipelines run and I can try to figure out something later, or maybe I'll move to GitHub Actions. I don't know. So this is now running its pipeline. Let's go over into the stages. We can see it's currently in the validate stage. We can click on that and get a little more information. So it is going through its process. Now, because it has to install checkoff and go through the validation, that could take a little while, but fortunately I talked enough that it has finished the validation stage and now it's going to go into the plan stage. So let's scroll down here and we'll go ahead and click into the plan. And this is going to take a few minutes to run. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to the part where it has completed its run and we can review the results. Okay, our pipeline has completed, our PR pipeline has completed, and you can see in the results, all the tests passed and one artifact was produced. And that's what we're looking for. That artifact is the plan file. We can go ahead and look at the published plan file task here, and it'll walk you through the fact that it did publish the plan file as an artifact. That is what we wanted. We can go back to the PR pipeline overall and see that that has been successful. What's the next step to do? It is to create a pull request and merge the change. So let's go over to the GitHub repository that I have here, and it tells me that a new branch was created and it has pushes. So we can go ahead and create our pull request. Now, in my ideal world, it would not have run that PR pipeline until I actually created the pull request. It would have waited, but for whatever reason, the integration between GitHub and Azure DevOps pipeline is a little dicey. So it already ran that for me. So I'm going to go ahead and run the compare pull request. They're able to merge because I didn't make any real significant changes. There's no collisions there or anything. So let's go ahead and create the pull request here. And we can look under here. It says 6 successful checks. Because it's already run all of the checks for me, there's no new checks to run. Now, ideally, it would have run this PR pipeline when I created the pull request now, rather than running the PR pipeline before I created the pull request. But right now it's telling me all the checks have passed. I'm good to go if I want to merge this change. Now, I do have merging blocked, requiring an approving review to the main. But since I'm the only one in the project, I can't approve myself. So I'm going to have to use an admin override. We'll go ahead and do that now by merging the pull request and saying, yep, I'm going to use my administrator privilege to do that and confirm the merge. Obviously, in a real world scenario, you would have somebody else review the results of the tests, especially the plan file, and make sure it's going to do what you want it to do. Now we have successfully merged this, so we can go ahead and delete that branch and go over to pipelines. And if we look at all of the pipelines here, the merge pipeline has now kicked off. Let's go ahead and look into the merge pipeline. And it says an individual CI for the main branch. That's what we would expect to see, because this pipeline only kicks off on commits to the main branch. And the only way you can get a commit to the main branch is for it to go through the PR process. So it is now running. We can go ahead and click on that. And there's only one job in here. It's apply. So we can go ahead and expand that now. We can see it has downloaded the pipeline artifact. That's what we wanted to see. And it's gone through the initialization of Terraform. So now the last thing to do is for it to run the apply based off that plan file. So I know it's going to apply exactly what is in that plan file. And that's what I want to see. And since it's only creating, it's going to have to recreate the subnets because I'm renaming them. And that's just what's required by Azure. But once that is complete, my merge will be successful, or I say my merge pipeline will be successful, and my target environment has been updated. There we go. It has successfully run the merge pipeline. So good stuff. I am all set. Okay, in this video, we saw how we could use Azure DevOps pipelines and break up our pipelines based off of what's happening inside of our code. So it's not just one monolithic pipeline, it's multiple pipelines. And you can target different environments with these pipelines as well. I haven't gotten to that level of complexity yet. Right now, I just have one environment that things flow to. But you could create a flow based off of tagging where maybe an update goes to development first and it's tested in there, and then it flows to a QA or a staging and then finally into production. And that could be a future video that I do for Azure DevOps. But right now, I think it was important to break up this big monolithic pipeline I had into different pipelines that follow sort of a GitOps mentality. Now, obviously, I ran into some problems when it comes to the trigger keyword versus the PR keyword. And ideally, I would like the PR pipeline to only kick off when I actually have an active pull request going. But that's something that I can work on separately. And actually, that's the sort of thing that might work better in GitHub Actions than it would in Azure pipelines. Who knows? Maybe that requires a little more experimentation on my part. The point is, ADO pipelines with GitHub integration seems to be a little buggy, and that's just kind of the way it is for now. So I've created my own workarounds and it works fine. And I'm sure you have thought of your own potential workarounds. But we did get our goal accomplished, which was to split up that pipeline and also add the Terraform versioning back in, because that did come around to bite me in the end. All right, that is going to do it for me. I want to say thank you so much for watching and for commenting on this video or any other videos that you've watched of mine. Some of the comments really are great, which sounds weird to say about YouTube, but they are. And I do read them and try to respond to them. So if you've enjoyed this or there's something you want me to cover, leave it in the comments or find me on Twitter. It's Ned1313. I want to make a big shout out to my patrons on Patreon. You help make this possible. So if you want to be amongst the esteemed elite that's up on the board right now, you can join Patreon now. It starts at $2 and then goes up to $5 and $15, I believe, are the tiers that I have today. So that's the big burrito. If you want to be the big burrito, you can do that for $15 a month. If that's not your thing, if you can't afford it, I totally understand. Not a big deal. If you want to subscribe to the channel, I really appreciate that. If you want to share with a friend, that's even better. I love getting the sharing out there. Like I said, that's going to do it for me for today. Until next time, stay healthy, stay safe out there. Bye for now. I know not everyone watches till the end of the video, so this is between you and me. This is just for us. If you're watching this, I have some 30-day passes to Pluralsight. No risk, no obligation, no credit card, none of that. If you want one of those codes, just reach out to me on Twitter. It's Ned1313, and I think I have about 20 left. I'll send you a code. All right, bye.